Hey, I'm Guy.
I'm John.
It's our YouTube channel. Subscribe to this channel. Give this video a like.
Check out the podcast below in the description.
And as always, tell your friends. All right, you ready for this? Now, you said on the last podcast that Pat Mahomes' numbers are what? How many touchdowns and how many picks?
25 touchdowns, 1 pick.
And
played 9 games, so we only have 7 left.
Okay, so we won't double the numbers, but almost. It got me thinking, what's Derek Carr up to? Quick little Google check. 16 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. 16 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. He's on pace for a better year than the year the Raiders won 12 games and went to the playoffs. And, of course, Carr got hurt, so they didn't win a playoff game. But he was, for a good portion of that year, he was in the MVP conversation. Now, MVP conversation's a whole other thing this year because Russell's there. The Mahomes numbers are ridiculous. Josh Allen. And we still have half of the season left. But it feels like this year, I would add too, John, he's just had some moments, right? The Saints game played really well against the Chiefs, which has not been his recent history. Even though the numbers weren't huge, this last week we saw him make some winning plays, down the field throws with his legs in a game they had to get against the Chargers. Feels like Carr this year has become kind of what we thought he could start becoming under Jon Gruden.
The one thing I will say is that forever growing up, if you threw 30 touchdowns in a year, that was really good. Because remember, the equivalent of when a couple of those guys threw 50 touchdowns, like Brady and Manning in the 2000s, was like the equivalent of someone hitting 70 home runs. And the difference is, those clearly Tom Brady and Peyton Manning were on, PEDs. It was incredible because 40 was nuts. 30 was a big win. Looking at Derek right now, because when you say he's on pace for what he's on pace for, 32-4, which would be an unreal year, you'd be like, oh, God, is he going to be top 5 in touchdowns? Right now, with 16 touchdowns, Guy, he's not even in the top 10 of touchdowns, which, again, I'm not trying to compare him to everyone else, but numbers now, it's never been easier to throw touchdowns. Steve Young, the Joe Montanas, I'm not trying to get on the old guy lawn or even diminish what Derek's doing, but it's just the reality of the league. We got 4 guys. 2 of them have played 9 games. The other 2 have played 8. That are already over 20 in Brady, Rodgers, Mahomes, and Russell. And you'd say, well, Rodgers, Mahomes, and Russell are the best players in the league. But then you look at Derek, he's right there with Herbert, Watson, Breeze, Roethlisberger. All those guys are 17 touchdowns, 16 touchdowns. He's right in that mix. To me, that's all you could ask for to start the season. Can Derek play like a top 15 quarterback? Because last year when Sando's article came out, I think he was 18 or 19, and it felt right. And right now, to me, he clearly is between 15 and 10 with their offense around him is good enough for them to make the playoffs. They couldn't afford to have a guy 19 to 25, right? They needed a guy to be 15 to 10, and he's given them that. And in big games this year, when it was winning time, like the Saints game, the Chiefs game, last week against the Chargers, that's 3 of their 5 wins. He's been pretty fucking money, especially in the second half, right?
Yeah. But I would say it's been eye test too, right? And it feels like the big play moments. He is second in the NFL in passes over 40 yards. Russell and I think it's Rodgers have 9. He has 8 of them. But you're right. You look at it's a list of guys with a lot of touchdowns, like Tannehill is right around him. But I think when you just look at his career, his best years are the years that the Raiders win games, and his worst years are the years that they don't win games. It's a stunning development, right? But when he doesn't throw picks, they have a good year. And really, the year his second year in the league, they went 7-9. He threw 13 picks, which is high. But he also threw 32 touchdowns, which is his career high. So his best years, they're good. So it's not really about, to your point, it's not like, is he the best quarterback in the NFL? He's just playing really good football, and it's also winning football. I think that's a big part of this in my head is I know what I've seen the 16-2 has looked like winning football because I've seen it against the Saints and the Chiefs, and I saw it against Herbert this last week.
Well, for example, he's the 3rd best quarterback in his own division, right? Yeah, and if you did a draft, obviously Mahomes would go number 1 overall. I think every team in the league would take Herbert over him. Fair or not, they just would. But his team is going to go to the playoffs. And to me, the number is not as much about the touchdowns. He's 5th in the league in completion percentage. And to me, his efficiency for as much as like hitting the big plays, which he should do because they can scheme up. They have trying to think off the top of my head, how many better deep threats are there than Ruggs? I know his numbers might not equal some of the other guys, but just the eye test, he's elite.
Well,
right?
Yes, absolutely, and he definitely changes the game. And somebody DM'd me, I think it was Raider posts on Twitter. This is actually a pretty good point. Said how Aguilar has been what we thought Ruggs is going to be. Like Aguilar's been a really good player down the field for them.
But Aguilar was a first-round pick. Like, he wasn't some random scrub, made big plays for the Eagles. That wasn't – guys like – you know what's weird about a guy like Aguilar is you can have a bad season when things go weird on your team, and people kind of throw you to the scrap heap.
For sure.
It's like,
and
guys,
also in Philly. You have a bad year in Philly, it gets –
yeah, and it's like he's worse than he actually is. Like, just watch the NFL. I take Aguilar over like half the receivers in the league that are playing. But Derek –
Sorry, just one thought on Aguilar.
He's basically 70%. Yeah,
Aguilar is 20 yards per reception this year, which is basically double what he's been in his career.
How many catches does Aguilar have right now?
17 catches, but 5 for touchdowns.
Yeah, so if you get 8 touchdowns at Aguilar, that's an incredible signing for a couple $1 million. Like, to me, you're probably interested in bringing him back, right?
Yeah.
Now, it does get a little complicated because he's going to be one of those guys with like 40 catches, but 8 of them are touchdowns. You're like, well, you got to pay me for the touchdowns, right? But you're not as productive as like a 75, 80 catch guy.
No, I want to pay you like my third or fourth receiver.
Yeah, which is what he is. But there are only 4 quarterbacks, guy, that are more accurate. Obviously, Drew Brees still the most accurate quarterback in the league. I'd say, well, of course he is. He throws basically fucking wheel routes and slants. Bridgewater, and I'm not trying to diminish Drew Brees. He's I think statistically the most accurate quarterback ever. But when you watch him, you're like, yeah, well, part of it is they don't really throw deep. Bridgewater, Russell Wilson, and Ryan Fitzpatrick. So let's just throw Ryan Fitzpatrick out. There are only 3 quarterbacks, full-time starters, that are more accurate than him. And you'd say, well, Teddy Bridgewater, do you know what Teddy Bridgewater is? He's like he's like a Breeze. Like, that's just kind of going to be his style. He's not a huge bomb it down the field. He's a really accurate passer because he doesn't have a big arm. Russell is the total package. And Derek is like kind of a combination of them all. Like, he can scramble. He's got a big arm. I think what Derek is finally kind of living up to is on Twitter and on just people that talk shit about him, just NFL people, it was like, he's like a poor man's Alex. He just dinks and dunks. Part of the reason Alex dinked and dunked was because he didn't have a big arm. That were like people like me and you was like, he does have a big arm. Like, he can throw the ball far. He can let it rip. He can make throws that Alex Smith could never make. Like opposite side, deep outs. Like, he can sling it. I always thought he was like, I wouldn't say naturally inaccurate, but not when I think Derek Carr, the first thing that comes to my mind is not accuracy, touch, but he is a rhythm guy. And when he gets into a rhythm, it's like you see with a golfer. When they just get hot, they start getting a lot of birdies. Like, when Derek is hot, all of a sudden he can shoot 5 under for 9 holes.
Yeah, I also think maybe the reason you feel that way, one reason, I know exactly what you're talking about. He likes making some, Rodgers level throws, and maybe that sometimes can create some inaccuracy, but on the balance, the numbers have been pretty good.
Well, like the 2 guys that are 1-2 in completion percentage, Bridgewater and Brees, they never even attempt some of the things Derek attempts to do, like a tight window, over the middle, just because his arm strength is there. And part of this conversation, though, is, Guy, the last couple years, we're like, when is he going to move on? When are we going to move on? I do think he's kind of solidifying himself. Like, they got way bigger needs than him. Like, why would you? For sure. He's under contract. He's relatively cheap. He's on a very team-friendly deal. Like, I think Derek is kind of solidifying himself as the quarterback of this team definitely next year. Like, I think he's in pretty good standing right now when you keep playing like this.
Absolutely. You keep this up, you're a playoff team. Maybe you win a playoff game, right? Do you win 10 games this year? Do you win 9?
Well, if you were to win 10 and they play, let's say, the Bills or the Titans in that first round game, do you think his performance in that game, let's say it's Buffalo. Let's say you're the 6th seed and you're playing Buffalo that's 3 seed. It'd be a big game for Derek, right? Because it'd be like, well, he never plays well in the cold. I would imagine Buffalo will be freezing cold that first week, and he doesn't play well. Like, does that change the whole conversation? Because that's sometimes the reality is it does a little bit, but
yeah.
If you get there.
I think if they just won and he had the game that he had against the Chargers, it would feel like a breakthrough.
Oh, if they won a playoff game, for sure. 100%.
But I'm just saying if they won and he played like the Charger game, right, where the numbers weren't incredible, but he had a couple drives that made the difference. that felt like a playoff performance.
My
Now,
take
it
is
was
if they
in the
need
air
to win a
conditioning.
playoff. My point is they need to win a playoff game for him to be like a lock to be just the forever starter.
I would say no, with the caveat that let's say they play a playoff game that's just the kind of games that they have played, just a shootout. He plays well, they lose. I think you'd feel really good about it.
Because they will
go into the offseason going, he's got to fix this defense.
If the Bills, let's say, are 12-4, and let's say the Raiders are 9-7 or 10-6, probably a 4 or 5 point underdog, right, on the road. Like they're not. It's not like they're the favorite to win.
I've already
the game.
played that game and lost.
They beat them pretty handily, right?
Yeah.
Remember, the score was closer in the actual game.
Yeah.
Because remember, it was like they were up a couple scores and then they had a hollow touchdown. But to me, if like I actually think Derek, non the playoff game, we've already talked about the games coming up, Miami and Indianapolis, that are going to be pseudo playoff games, right? Those are playoff teams battling for the spots. If Derek plays well in those games, both at home, that to me is going to hold a lot of weight. Like, because he was a big reason they got there, his efficiency. Like, because to me, if he wasn't good, they'd have no shot, right? Because their defense stinks. They are pretty dependent on him making plays. Mm-hmm. And I'd be like, well, yeah, John, it's the NFL. He's a quarterback. But I just mean, like,
this
their
is not
team
the Titans.
Specifically.
This is not Tannehill, whose numbers are also very good.
Yeah, no, he's been pretty good too.
But to me, Derek passes an eye test that Tannehill has not when I watch.
For example, the Colts, what would they do for Derek Carr right now? Or the Bears? I just think about the Bears or the Colts. Like if they had Derek Carr, they would be, both of them probably have an extra win. The Colts would be really good. You know,
the Bears would just look a lot better.
Yeah, the Bears would be a lot better.
One other,
he has just got to me his career back on track of being a guy that is no longer like talked about like some scrub.
No,
right?
Yeah, especially if he keeps this up. And the one problem for Aguilar coming back would be the Raiders probably hope Brian Edwards can just be that guy next year.
Yeah.